Yeah, sounds good.
All right. Okay. Welcome, everybody. Today we have Dr. Teliska. As you know, she's been serving as a medical science liaison for Otsuka Pharmaceuticals. She started her career in 2022 with Azurity Pharmaceuticals, and today we just want to have a Q&R session open for you guys that have joined us. We have a variety here of people from graduate school, postdocs, people that are already in the farm, and we have received a nice body here of questions. And whenever you feel like you want to jump in, just raise your hand. And Lindsay and I, we talked about making this very informal. Okay, so just feel free if there is any question that you have not submitted, or it maybe just come up during our discussion. Again, just raise your hand and we'll open the floor for you. All right. Okay, Lindsay, the first great question we received here is we would just jump right in is what qualities are essential to become a successful medical science liaison?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. First and foremost, I'll just give a really quick disclaimer. Anything that I talk about today is just my own views, doesn't reflect my company. So this is just based on, my own experiences. So there are a lot of qualities that make a really good MSL. These are qualities that I'm still learning myself. I've been an MSL for about 2 years, but I think there's always a lot to learn. One of the qualities I would say is you really have to enjoy talking to people. That's a huge part of the job. So much of my job is going out in the field and having meetings with all different types of people. I'm meeting with medical doctors. I'm meeting with nurse practitioners, physician assistants, nurses. You're talking to office administrators. So there's so much communication that you're doing outside in the field, but also within your own company. I meet with salespeople in my company. I talk with MSLs across the country, if we have to collaborate on anything or share ideas about topics. And I also talk to, upper management in the company. I talk to different departments. So you do a lot of communication with other people. And for some people, there might be a lot of nerves about communicating with people you don't know, or maybe you just don't like to talk that much, you like to kind of keep to yourself. That's totally fine, but maybe the MSL career wouldn't quite be for you then because there's a lot of communication that you have to do. So I think going along with that, another trait that makes a really good MSL is being able to adapt your communication style or your plan based on who you're speaking to. So you do want to have a good level of awareness of how the conversation's going, and be able to change if necessary. Sometimes I meet with a physician and they have about 30 seconds to give me, and they're looking like, okay, like they just want the really quick information. So I have to be able to, not chit chat or not give too much information and just give them exactly what they want to know. Other times I might meet with somebody and they're sitting back in their office chair. They have all the time in the world and they want to hear a lot about where'd you go to school? Where do you live? Where have you traveled to? Sometimes they just want to know a lot of information and they like to talk. So in that situation, you'd want to be able to pivot and be a conversationalist and just enjoy the conversation back and forth. Another trait that makes a good MSL is you do have to be a pretty independent worker and you do have to be self-driven. So the way that it typically works, again, every company can be different, but the way that it typically works is that you're going to be in charge of your own schedule. I'm in charge of emailing doctors, physicians, any medical professional. I'm in charge of emailing them, trying to set up meetings, and actually going about my days in the field. You don't necessarily have somebody scheduling things for you or telling you you need to do this, you need to go here. You have to do a lot of that yourself. So if you're somebody who prefers to have, like a task list provided to you or a very straightforward workday, like I do this from 9 to 10, I do this from 10 to 11, that's not typically how the MSL role works. So that is something that I've had to get used to. Really being proactive and planning meetings 1, 2, 3 months in the future so that I know that I'm filling those days with work ahead of time. So again, it's also a good quality to have is being able to plan a lot and be a proactive person so that you actually have meetings set up in the field. I'll pause there for a minute and just see if anybody has any questions or input. So again, I think the most important things are being a good conversationalist and being able to adapt your conversation style and also being a proactive worker because you do have to do a lot of the work on your own.
Anybody can jump right in.
I'll ask a question. I'm
Sure.
kind of curious with you have to talk with so many different types of people.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of us are coming from a either scientific or clinical background. So
Mhm.
I'm curious in like your experience, what group of people was kind of the hardest to adjust to, be it like marketing, be it sales, be it, the MDs. Yeah, I'm curious
Mhm.
about like where you might have had to kind of, fix up your jargon or, get on their
Yeah.
same wavelength.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't feel that I've had too much difficulty communicating with people within the company. That's been pretty easy to adjust to, but I would say probably maybe with medical doctors in the field because when I started this MSL job, I was new to the field of Alzheimer's disease. And if I'm having a meeting with a doctor, sometimes they just go right into the topic and they might reference a diagnostic test that I don't know off the top of my head, or they might start talking about some, lab levels of various markers or anything like that. And that's not information, since I'm not a practicing physician, that's not information that I have off the top of my head. So I've had to really practice and make sure that I'm looking up those diagnostic tests that are typically used, that I'm looking up common medications that are used, so that if a medical professional just says it really quickly, I'm understanding what that reference is and what they're referring to. So that takes practice and that takes time. And a lot of that information would typically be provided by your company during like a training process. But I think since I'm not in the medical field, adjusting to all the jargon and everything that they use, that was a little bit difficult.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Lindsay, I just want to throw a question out there. How
Mhm.
how intimidating it is to kind of talk to these medical doctors, or how did you overcome that?
Yeah, it can definitely be intimidating at times, especially when you're just starting out because you're not practiced. I think the biggest way to overcome that is to just be confident in what you're going to talk about. So, really practicing if it's a presentation, making sure you've done your own research so that, like I just said, you know the common questions that they might ask, or you know what drugs they might talk about, what tests they might talk about. You just want to really prepare because then that way, if they do throw a question at you, and if you answer it correctly, or you're able to answer it, you're going to be a lot more confident in those meetings. Um, but yeah, I'd be lying if I said I was never nervous walking into a meeting with the head of a department at a hospital or something like that. It can definitely be nerve-wracking. But I think just preparing yourself, that helps a lot.
Awesome.
Uh,
Is anybody? Yeah, go ahead,
yeah.
Kinsley.
Hey, Dr. Teliska, I want to ask you, what are some things you did in during your PhD to help you prepare for this role to apply for, for your application?
Yeah, in terms kind of related to what I'm talking about, so much of the role is presenting data, communicating data in a conversation setting. So I think one thing that's important to do in grad school is take any opportunity you can to present your work. So whether that's going to conferences, whether it's doing a journal club in your program, if you're given the opportunity to present your data during a lab meeting, anything like that just gives you more practice getting up in front of a group of people and
Mhm.
speaking in a scientific manner. And I think that can really help prepare you for the MSL role. Yeah, Rebecca.
So I was wondering in your 30-second, like in and out kind of spiels, what is the type of information that doctors are most interested in? Is it like clinical trial data? Is it new formulations? Like if they really just want like the meat and potatoes, what is that?
Mhm. Yeah, so that will definitely vary based on the company's goals. Like if the company is really developing a lot of new drugs and you're kind of in the development stage, or if you have drugs already on the market. For me personally, my experience has been that we already have FDA approved drugs. So typically providers are looking for any updated information on safety and efficacy. So if we have any extension trials that we've done, they're interested in hearing that information. In addition to that, I think I get a lot of questions in general just about safety. What were the adverse events? How often did they occur? What was the severity of the adverse events? So it's typically about safety. All right.
Wonderful. Lindsay, we have a segue question here is what surprised you most about the MSL role? And interesting, what is your most favorite and least part of the job?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. Um, Maybe what surprised me the most would be how independent of a job it is. My territory that I cover is about 7 states, and I was kind of surprised at how I was just told to like manage the territory.
Yeah.
And that's very vague. There's not too much direction with that, but a lot of times that's the nature of the job. Sometimes you are handed a list of providers to target, especially if the company has been around for a while, there's been MSLs in that territory before you, then there's kind of an established list that the company wants you to follow. In my case, we were working with a relatively new therapeutic area for our company, so we didn't have an established order of how to do things. So I was pretty surprised that how much responsibility I had in deciding, okay, what hospital systems do I want to go talk to? What nursing homes should I go talk to? What doctors should I be trying to meet with? That was all really just up to me. So that's something I'm still working on and still learning. So that probably surprised me the most. My favorite part of the job, I'll answer it in two ways. So in terms of the day-to-day of the job, I think it's really satisfying when a provider's unsure of the data surrounding the drug. They want to like it, but they just need more information. And I really get satisfaction when I'm able to give them that safety information or that clinical, if they want to learn more about the clinical trials, how they were conducted. I feel really satisfied when I'm able to deliver that information. And then if I have a follow-up meeting with them, maybe 3 months later, when they tell me, oh, I tried the drug because I had a patient and they're doing really well on it. Like that's a very satisfying feeling. And again, medical science liaisons are not in sales at all. At the end of the day, it's not my job to care if a doctor prescribes or not. I just want to make sure I'm providing them with all of the information they would need to make that decision. But it is still satisfying to know that because of information I was able to provide, a doctor made a choice that was beneficial to a patient. That's one part of my favorite. I guess the less serious favorite part of the job is there's a lot of flexibility. Like I said, you're making your own schedule. So there's days where I'm out of town for a couple nights in a row because I have a lot of meetings set up, in a farther place of my territory. But then that means that the next week I can spend some time at home, get some stuff done around my house, catch up on emails, because I had just been in the field for a few days. So there's definitely flexibility. You're not clocking in, 9 to 5 every single day. So it does offer a lot of flexibility, which is nice. But on the flip side, you tend to have travel and you can be away from home for a few days. So it balances out. My least favorite part of the job, is probably how much non-answers you get. I send so many emails, I make so many phone calls, and at the end of the day, a lot of people just don't answer you. They're too busy, they're uninterested, they're not allowed to work with pharma at all, they're not allowed to meet with anyone in the pharmaceutical industry. So there's a lot of dead ends, and it does take perseverance to make sure you're following up or being creative in ways that you do your reach out so that you do get answers and responses from people. But that's probably my least favorite part because sometimes it can just feel discouraging when you're sending out, I don't know, 50 emails a day and no one will write back. So does anybody have any questions or comments on that?
Yeah, I actually want to throw a question out there. Let's say you mentioned a word, your day-to-day activities, and actually you mentioned two things that you have to deal with, and I want to know how you do that. Number one is becoming confident on the data that you have to study and to present, and also manage all these other things that are more bureaucracy of the job. And managing territories, where you should go, who you should reach out. So it seems that those are two different areas that you have to learn how to manage your time really well, I believe.
Yeah.
Can you share anything about how do you do that, especially in the beginning, probably in the first 3 to 6 months?
Yeah. So with my current company that I'm at, they have a pretty extensive onboarding and training process. So mine lasted about 2.5 or 3 months where I
Right.
was just training, and that was fantastic. We had to meet with the training department.
Did you break out for you guys? All right, I'll ask her to start over. Yeah.
Sorry. Okay. I think I'm back.
Lindsay, can you start over? I think we
Yes, yes,
lost
yes.
you from the very beginning.
Yes, I froze. I froze.
Thank you.
Yes, so I was just saying my current company that I'm at had a very intense training and onboarding period. It lasted about 3 months, and that was really great to have. It was very structured, and we were provided with papers to read, PowerPoints, videos to watch, and that helped train me on the disease state that I was covering, but
Mhm.
also our drug product that we had. Not all companies have that extensive of a onboarding. So it was something I was looking for when I was job searching, and I was very grateful for it. So I felt pretty confident with the material just based on that training period. But I also periodically do go through all of the PowerPoints that we have. They do get updated if we have new data. So I just try to go through the resources on my own and just make sure that I'm still understanding everything and that I'm on top of any new information that's put in there. So those are things that I might do on a day where I don't have any meetings and I'm not out in the field. So I just kind of review the materials that I have. Um, in terms of managing the territory, I'm still learning how to do that. In my first couple months out in the field, I was just meeting with anyone wherever I could go, just to start hearing from providers and just to start learning what they have to say about the therapeutic area and about our product. This year, it's my goal to be more strategic and think about what centers are really important for me to go to. You know, where are the decision makers? What nursing homes could use a lot more data from us? So I'm trying to be more strategic about it this year. That's one of my goals, but it does take time. And there's a lot of change in the pharmaceutical industry. So my territory right now is 7 states. And in a couple months, they might change it down to 2 states, or they hopefully not, but they could expand it even more to 10 states, you know? So there is a lot of flexibility, or a lot of change in the pharmaceutical industry as well that you always have to be ready for. So I think it's pretty much always a learning process, and you just try to do the best that you can.
Awesome. Thank you. Anybody want to add anything to that, Kinza?
Yeah, how often do you communicate with the MSLs that are handling the other states that you're working with? And, how often do you guys share insights on how they're working?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I am on a team of 10 MSLs, and we are all in the Northeast, covering different products or different therapeutic areas. But we do come together once a month and have a meeting. But then we also do talk informally. Like I'm always texting or calling some of my colleagues and asking for help with something, asking questions about what I should be doing. So we have a lot of informal communication, but formally we have a meeting once every month with our Northeast team. And then our company also does company-wide monthly meetings with all of the MSLs across the country to give any relevant updates or guidance on things.
Awesome. Thank you for the question, guys. Well, Lindsay, you have mentioned a little bit about, starting with this past company that you are currently working.
Mhm.
And there's a segue question here is, what is the biggest differences between that you have found between a small and a larger company? And a segue into that question is, what do you suggest for someone starting out, I guess, related to the small and
Mhm.
larger pharmaceutical companies? What would you suggest for a person to enter into that role, especially without experience?
Yeah. It's a great question. So, like Luan just said, my first MSL job right out of grad school was to a very, very small pharmaceutical company. I was one of two MSLs there. So I had the eastern half of the country, she had the western half of the country. So that I think is probably one of the biggest territories. I don't know of anyone who has the entire country, but maybe. So I knew going into this job that it was going to be less of a traditional MSL role, just since the company was so small. And it wasn't exactly what I wanted. But if any of you have started applying for MSL jobs, you know that they're difficult to get. You know, it's a very competitive field. So I was happy to take pretty much any MSL job that was offered to me. So I didn't hesitate to accept that first role. Um, Comparing it with my role now at a more mid-sized company, I think one of the major differences is at a small company, you will do a lot of different jobs. I was doing a lot of jobs that don't typically fall under the MSL role just because there's not other staff to do those jobs. So I had a side project where I was kind of building up the social media for the company, which is not something an MSL would typically do. Um, I had a lot of meetings and interaction with the business side of the company where we were learning about what acquisitions they were trying to make, what different drugs they were trying to acquire. I also had a lot of direct interface with the medical information department, which I interact with very differently now at my larger company. But, we would be writing reviews together. I'd be working with medical information to decide what doctors I should be meeting with. Like they were kind of helping me with that. So there was just a lot of overlap with different departments. And I felt one of the reasons I wanted to leave that company is I didn't really feel like an MSL. I felt like I was kind of just an employee that was handling things internally with the company, but I was never really sure of what I was supposed to be doing out in the field because I wasn't getting direction or really training from anybody. Um, so I did want to leave and go to a larger company that could offer training and had other departments and other supports in place so that I could actually do the MSL role. So at a larger company, you typically will have a pretty good training and onboarding process because they likely have an entire training department. So I think a larger company is pretty good for a new MSL, but it can go either way in terms of what level of experience a company wants to hire. Sometimes a larger company, they only are going to want MSLs that already have experience just because the company is running really well and they just want to get someone in there who knows what they're doing. Um, Smaller companies can go both ways too. Like there's not really a 100% answer. I think smaller companies are sometimes more open to hiring a new MSL just because they want to get somebody in there. However, they typically don't have the training resources that a larger company will have. So maybe a smaller company only wants an experienced MSL. Really, it can go either way. I've seen
Right.
people get hired at bigger companies, at smaller companies with a lot of experience, no experience. Um, and there's not really a right or wrong way to do it. Again, I do recommend taking any opportunity you can get as long as it works for you. Um, However, I think one thing to consider is you'll probably have better training at a bigger company, but that's just been my experience. It can go a couple different ways.
Well, it seems that the smaller company also cause you to wear many hats,
Yeah.
which is part of your experience today and
Yeah.
definitely helped you out how to manage time and different tasks,
Hmm.
those things that you didn't think that you had to do.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of pros and cons related
Yeah.
to also being open to get your first job. And this is what I
Yep.
have heard a lot. If you get the chance to get your first MSL, go for it because at least you have it there that you got the starting point.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
why it's so important. Yeah.
And I think it was one thing that was good about the small company is I did get a lot of interaction with different departments, whereas now I'm really just expected to be an MSL and I really just stay within that medical affairs, MSL department. It was interesting at the smaller company to learn a lot about the business side. I interacted a lot with medical information and learned how they, went through all of the literature, pulled together papers to write reviews and things like that. So, there's pros and cons, but ultimately, especially at the beginning of my career, I wanted to make sure I was getting MSL training, and I just wasn't getting that at my first company. So that's really the reason I chose to leave. And now I feel a lot more confident in being an MSL because I was able to have that training.
Awesome. Anybody, any question?
Oh, that's a good, quick one. I'm trying to phrase this the right way, but like with the small company you were at and all those hats that you were there any lasting impacts from those experiences that you either carried over into your new job at the large company that you feel like has accelerated your abilities or even impacted your career trajectory? For instance, you talked about dealing with the business side more, so maybe that gave you some kind of elucidated something that you didn't see before.
Yeah. I wouldn't say that I carried over anything that helped me in my career abilities. Possibly if I was there longer, I was only there about a year. What I will say though is it did open my eyes to different possibilities in the pharmaceutical industry. Um, I didn't know that I could potentially be interested in business development. I didn't know that everything that the medical information department did. So at my bigger company, I do have less exposure to those things because again, those departments are all built out. There's no reason for me to be over there. So it did open my eyes to a lot of different avenues that I could potentially go down if I decide I don't want to be an MSL anymore. So I think that was beneficial.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome. Oh, okay. So we have an interesting question here, quite surprising. Um, this person is interested to hear more about the pipeline slash drug development in the MSL field. And she or he says, I rarely see posting for pipeline specifically. Can you share any resources how to connect with recruiters and companies with pipeline opportunities? I guess this is from my standpoint of view, how I understand is you look at the job post, there's no really details about
Mhm.
the pipelines that they're looking for that precisely position. So
Yeah. Yeah, this is a good question. A lot of times, you're right, there's not a job posting might not explicitly say what therapeutic area or what drug you'll be supporting. A lot of times they do, but that's not a guarantee. So first and foremost, I would recommend that you're looking on the company's website and you can look at their pipeline. You can look at the drugs that they have approved by the FDA and are on the market, and then you can look at drugs that they have in phase 3 development, phase 2, phase 1, preclinical. And sometimes they might not have a drug name, but they'll just say that, they have a compound that they're working on for Alzheimer's disease or a compound for schizophrenia. So I definitely recommend that you are looking on companies' websites and understanding what their pipeline is. Um, if a company doesn't have an FDA approved drug, then you know that you're going to be more of that pipeline MSL where you're working on the clinical trials, you're moving towards launch, and you'd be supporting that drug during its launch period. I personally don't have experience with that, so I can't speak too much to how being an MSL through a launch and through that pipeline differs from being an MSL for a drug that's already on the market. If you are interested more in that, I would look up different companies, find a company that doesn't have an FDA approved drug, and then try to find on LinkedIn an MSL at that company or somebody in, medical affairs from that company that can give you some more information on what that's like. Um, I'm sure there's a lot of differences in being an MSL for a drug that's already approved versus one that's going through its launch period and is pre-launch. I just don't have experience with that, but typically smaller companies won't have an FDA approved drug yet, and they're working to get it towards launch. So I feel like in general, if you're at a larger company, you're probably going to be working on a drug that's already approved. But again, larger companies also have drugs going through a pipeline, so you might get placed on one that's pre-launch. I don't know if Renee is by her computer still, and if she wants to give any insight, because I know she worked on a drug during a launch period.
Yeah, she did. I remember
But
that too.
it definitely can differ, but the type of meetings you're having, what you're talking about, from a drug that's post-launch to pre-launch.
Hi, I'm here. I'm just kind of in and out. What was the question exactly?
The question was just about being an MSL for a drug that's pre-launch and being in a pipeline MSL, either how to find those positions or maybe even how it might differ from being an MSL for a drug that's pre-launch and post-launch.
Yeah, so I think in terms of how to find it, there isn't a clear answer for that. And I think I heard
Mhm.
your answer, Lindsay. It's
Mhm.
pretty spot on. I don't feel like a company would ever, or not say ever, but a company is most likely not to advertise that it's for a pre-launch MSL.
Mm,
But they would place you based on their needs. And in terms of the job itself, it actually does vary quite differently. There's a lot more compliance guardrails in place if you're a pre-launch MSL or supporting a product pre-launch, because everything that you do in your job, your entire job, is reactive.
right.
Whereas there is a degree of proactive work that you can do when you're supporting a product that's already approved. So I think it's just more of like a sort of rigid training protocol for
Mhm.
supporting a pre-launch drug. But I thought it was, in my experience now that I've done both, I really liked it because you were kind of learning alongside the KOLs.
Mhm.
And so they were really interested in like waiting for the new data to come out and all of the updates, because they were, if they were excited about that product and it's a potential approval, they were, really, really eager to meet with you. So
Mhm.
that I found to be a really exciting part of that versus supporting a drug that is tried and true and works, and a KOL might like it and talk to their peers about it, but there just is like a special level of excitement when you're working on something pre-launch. So that was kind of my only 2 cents, but yeah, there's definitely positives and negatives to both, just in terms of being more careful compliance wise in the field pre-launch.
Mhm. Yeah, that sounds good. Thanks, Renee. I just want to clarify too, in case anyone's unfamiliar. Renee and I are using the words like proactive versus reactive. So that's something that comes up a lot, and that you really have to keep in mind as an MSL. So a lot of what MSLs do is going to be reactive. So that means a provider is reaching out to me as an MSL and they have a question about either the drug, the clinical trials, the data. Then at that point, once the provider has already reached out, then I can have a conversation and answer those questions accordingly. Sometimes at certain companies, they just want the MSLs to be reactive. So you're just waiting to provide information when a medical professional asks for it. At other companies, you can also be proactive. So, for example, at my company, I do a lot of proactive work as well. So I can reach out to an office, I can introduce myself, I can start the conversation, and then I can say, "Hey, I have a presentation. Can I come in and give a presentation for more education around our product or the disease state?" So that's an example of being proactive. And then reactive is when you're just waiting really to receive a question or to receive a request to have a meeting. Um, there are certain topics that we're only allowed to be reactive on, and you learn all of that in training. So, yeah, I just wanted to make that distinction in case those aren't really terms you've heard of in the MSL career.
Awesome, Lindsay. This is really good stuff. I love to hear that. Yeah, there's a part of liability, right? This is something, I guess, it gets us when you're being interviewed. It's something that can get you caught
Mhm.
on by surprise. Can you extend a little bit more on this fact of liability, or how to, properly approach these trainings that you receive, and and learn how to speak facts and not speak anything what you think, what would be good,
Right.
or
Hmm.
your opinion, right? Uh,
Yeah.
so can you say anything about that? Because I think that comes up in interviews a lot. And
Yeah.
if you have no experience, it's kind of hard to answer that question.
Yeah. Again, you definitely will go over this in training, but as an MSL, you are never ever supposed to make a recommendation. We're not treating those patients, so you are always just supposed to provide unbiased data. So if a doctor wants to know, um, my patient has this condition. Can they also take this drug with the condition? You're
Right.
not supposed to say, oh, yeah, they should, or, oh, yeah, it'd be fine. You just provide the data. Like, yes, we've done a trial that says there are no contraindications, there's no interactions with any other medications, and you just provide the data. It's always up to the provider to make that prescribing decision. So you're never going to give any medical advice, even if you yourself, if you're a pharmacist, if you're a medical doctor, if you're a PA, and then you become an MSL, you still are representing the company. You are never going to be acting as if you're treating the patient. Um, we also answer a lot of questions that are off-label, meaning that the FDA has not approved that drug for that indication. Um, Typically, you're able to answer off-label questions as long as they're reactive. So if a doctor asks me, hey, I know this drug is for Alzheimer's disease, but do you have any data from your company if it can also be used for depression? That would be considered off-label in that situation. But if I have data from the company, I can provide that data. Um,
By the way, Lindsay,
yeah.
the person or the MD asking you for those information,
Mhm.
they have to comply to some sort of form, right? That the company, the, how does it work? Like the interaction, they come to
Yeah.
you, you are the reactive, and
Yep.
you have to ask them, okay, you sign this that I'm giving you the information off label.
So it can work a couple different ways. So if I was one-on-one with a provider, I'm in their office and they ask me an off-label question, I'm allowed to answer it with resources that I have.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think what you might be referring to also, at our company, we call it a MRF. It's a medical information request form. So a MRF is typically used if I don't have the answer. Then I can fill out a MRF with the doctor's question, their information, and I submit it to our medical information department. They can go through all of our resources and see if they can find the answer. That form is also used at my company if a salesperson is in the field and they're talking to a provider and the
Mm-hmm.
provider asks an off-label question, the salespeople are not allowed to answer
Right.
off-label questions. So they fill out that form and submit it to our company so that the provider can then be given the information to answer their question. So to answer an off-label question, at least at my company, I don't always have to fill out a form, but I just know what resources I'm allowed to use. And if I need extra resources beyond that, then I would fill out a form to the company to request more information.
I see.
But you learn all of this in your training, and companies might do it different ways. But as an MSL in general, you're allowed to answer the off-label questions as long as you're doing it in an unbiased way and with data and not your own opinion.
Is it often that these off-label questions can then go back to your company and then start off like a whole new project to address these off-label questions? Does that happen often?
It can happen, yeah. What I have found in my experience so far is that if a question is asked enough, the company will put together a resource so that we can more readily answer that question and not have to go through this long process of requesting, more information, filling out the forms. They'll just put together a resource for us if they find that a question is asked enough in the field. Um, we also have a way to submit any insights and questions that we get from doctors. So we're always recording that as well. And I think if enough interesting ideas or interesting topics came up, I'm sure the medical strategy department would maybe pursue that. But the most common thing is they will put together resources for us to answer these questions that get asked often.
Awesome. These are really good questions. Anybody else? Until so we until I move to the next question here. Okay, great. So how to pivot into other therapeutic areas and how do you actually stay update to your TA, to your
Mhm.
therapeutic area?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I did do a small pivot for my therapeutic areas. So my background is in neuroscience. I have my PhD in neuroscience, but my project was on peripheral nerve regeneration. It wasn't super relevant to the MSL jobs that I did end up getting, but it was within the realm of neuroscience. So I was mostly applying to neuroscience positions. Now, my first MSL job, I supported two drugs that treated epilepsy. And when I was moving to my second MSL job, the posting was actually for agitation associated with Alzheimer's dementia. So that's, not related to epilepsy. I don't have background experience in Alzheimer's disease, but I think because it fell under the realm of neuroscience and I had MSL experience, they were fine. They were fine taking me. So sometimes you don't really even have to do that much work when switching therapeutic areas. You typically don't box yourself in too much that you can't move. It would be more of a jump if I tried to go from, neuroscience and epilepsy maybe to oncology,
Right.
because I don't have any oncology experience. So I can imagine that a company would want to hire somebody with at least some level of oncology experience. However, the longer you're an MSL and the more experience you have as an MSL, I think that looks desirable. So a company would probably be more open to accepting you without any therapeutic experience because they're confident in your MSL abilities. Um, and staying up to date on my therapeutic area, we do get a lot of updates from our company. If we have meetings, if there's a new drug approved, or we talk about if there are, competitor drugs we want to keep an eye on and things like that. I personally signed up for a couple like news alert emails with different buzzwords. So I might get an email once a week or twice a month or something like that with buzzwords about Alzheimer's disease or agitation, since that's what I cover. And then I'm just making sure that I'm catching any articles that are coming up on really like a monthly basis. But typically, most of what we need to know does come from the company. But I think it's always good to be reading and like researching and, going on PubMed and just seeing if there's any new papers that are relevant to your field.
That's awesome, Lindsay. Well, this is a segue question here, but is there conferences or events that your company or you yourself seek to attend on a, I don't know, monthly basis? Or I know you have to travel a lot, but
Mhm.
how often do you actually travel to these conferences and events to keep yourself
Yeah.
up to date?
So at my first company, which again was much smaller, I was at conferences all the time because we only had two MSLs to cover really any conference that covered epilepsy. So I was traveling a lot to conferences.
Mhm.
In my company now that's bigger, we have between 50 and 60 MSLs across the country. So what they have us do is they list out all the conferences that they want an MSL at, and we just kind of rank our
Okay.
order of preference. And then you typically get chosen for one to two. So I'll go to one or two national conferences. So maybe I have to go to San Diego, I have to go to, Denver, whatever it may be. But then on top of that, I have flexibility and responsibility to attend local and regional conferences. So I try to seek out conferences in Massachusetts, in Rhode Island, in Connecticut. And
Mhm.
as long as my manager approves it, I'm allowed to go to those conferences. So I actually find a lot more use out of the local and regional conferences. And these might be, a physician assistant association, a nurse practitioner association. I find a lot of benefit from these conferences because then I'm actually meeting providers in my territory and I'm learning what the concerns are or what the priorities are within my territory. So I do like going to the national conferences because it's a good way for me to, see any MSL friends I have. You get to connect with people that you already know, who might also be attending those large conferences. But I actually find that they're a little less helpful for my day-to-day job because I might have a great conversation with a provider, but if they're based in Texas, there's
Mhm.
not really a reason for me to keep up that constant of a relationship with them. So I do try to prioritize the regional and local conferences as well. And at my company, we're allowed to go to those as long as my manager says. Um, but that can vary company to company how they handle conferences.
Awesome. Any questions?
I have a question that is a slightly pivot from this topic, but since you
Yeah.
mentioned like your manager, I was wondering about like the general career trajectory. I feel like often you can kind of be an MSL and then maybe like a senior and then you start managing people, or maybe you want to be a medical director. But
Mhm.
I was just curious, like what kind of opportunities you are once you're like comfortable and confident in your MSL role, if you
Mhm.
like do want to do a different role that is similar, what you would be interested in or what there is to have.
Yeah. Um, so at my company, we have, I guess it's three levels of MSL. We have like the regular MSL, which I am, we have a senior MSL, and then we have I do, Medical Science Liaison Director or something like that. And then we also have a manager. So you can really go in any of those trajectories. A lot of people I find do eventually become a manager of a territory and of a team. That's something that I'm potentially interested in. I'm also interested in learning more about the different departments within the pharmaceutical industry. I'm definitely still learning those. I could imagine potentially being interested in medical strategy. So that would really be the team that takes all of the insights that MSLs gather, takes the company's priorities, the company's budget, and they're making decisions, are there any drugs that we should be acquiring? How should we market this drug to reach the largest amount of people? All decisions like that would fall under medical strategy. I could imagine being interested in that. I just don't know too much about it yet. So while being an MSL, I am going to try to take the opportunity to network within my company and learn about those career paths. And if people were MSLs that moved to different career paths, how did they get there? But I think within pharma, sometimes it might not necessarily be a promotion, but there's a lot of opportunity for lateral movements to different departments as well. Yeah, you're welcome.
Excellent. Those are really good questions. Okay, we're going to switch a little bit here, Lindsay, and also because we have graduate students, we have postdocs, and there's a typical question here for those that are starting to pursue their career with MSL and how to switch from a PhD to MSL and how early one should apply for such a positions. I guess you can
Yeah.
speak from your own experience, coming directly from academia into the MSL role, which is quite unique.
Yeah. Let's see. So I definitely recommend if you are a PhD student, if you're a postdoc and you're interested in pursuing the MSL role, I really recommend using LinkedIn and networking with a variety of MSLs. I think it's really important to make sure you understand what the career is. And then also, once you start developing these relationships, I think it's important to be able to have a relationship with somebody where they can help you, where they're willing to take time to look at your resume, where they're willing to help you with your interview process. If you want to practice some questions or learn more about it, it's really good to have an MSL who's already doing the job, be kind of like a mentor for you and be helpful to you. This might take time to build this relationship, and I just want to caution everybody that even if you are feeling in a position where you're so eager to become an MSL, always be respectful of people's time. I'll just say I've gotten a lot of messages on LinkedIn where people are kind of demanding and just right off the bat sending their resume, telling me that they're applying to a job, so they need me to read their resume. And that's not received well. I don't respond to those messages because that's not somebody genuinely trying to learn from me. That's somebody who just wants to get something out of me. So I definitely encourage you to just be respectful when reaching out, be appreciative of someone's time if they give it to you. But I have found that there's so many MSLs that are willing to help. Lots of us have gotten help along the way. I know so many people helped me with my resume, my interviews. So there's definitely a lot of people willing to help. But you want to take time to build those relationships. Somebody's not going to, do so much for you just because you message them one time, right? But with that out of the way, I think that the job process, it can take a long time. Like that's just the honest answer. It can take a long time. You might be really lucky and a job opens up and the territory you want, and you just are a great fit for that territory and you get the job pretty early, and that's awesome. But for some people, it can take longer. So for me, I started applying for MSL jobs when I was about 6 months out from graduating. I had a very open line of communication with my professor, and he said, if you get a job offer before that 6 month timeline, like we can be flexible and we can figure it out. Like I don't want you to turn down a job. So again, when I assumed I was about 6 months out from graduating, that's when I started applying. And I had a ton of rejections, like so many rejections. I just kept applying, applying, applying. And it took a long time. And I say that not to be discouraging, but just to emphasize that it is a competitive role. And if you get rejected 4 times, that doesn't mean that you're not qualified to be an MSL. It just means it's a competitive role. So if it's really something that you want, you've worked with MSLs, you've worked with recruiters potentially, your resume is good. I really encourage you to just keep trying and to try not to get too discouraged. It can take a while, but I think that, it's a numbers game. The more jobs you apply to, at the end of the day, if you're qualified, I think a job would pan out. So I would just make sure if you're in academia as well, because there can be a lot of negative stereotypes surrounding the pharmaceutical industry. I think it's important to just have an open line of communication with your professor, your mentor, whatever, your advisor, so that you're all on the same page about when you can leave, if you have any responsibilities you have to finish up before you leave. I think it's good to just have those conversations so that you know what the expectations are and when you can leave. And that way, if you're interviewing for an MSL job and they ask you, when will you be done? You have an honest answer to give them.
I've got a follow-up question. I'm kind of curious. So I've heard this from a number of MSLs now, but the getting used to rejection, not just in the job application process, but once you get on the other side, but especially in the job application process, like, do you have any advice for what helped you kind of weather that storm? I think some of it's probably being stubborn, but yeah, I'm curious if you have any advice on that.
I guess not too much advice other than just keep trying, and being open to change. I changed my resume a lot throughout the interview process or the application process. And, you might spend a lot of time on your resume, so you feel kind of married to it, right? Like you don't want to change it how it is. But if you get rejected from 20 jobs, maybe there's a better way to present and demonstrate your skills and why you're, a good candidate. So I think that helps too, maybe having a couple different versions of your resume and trying it out. Try a version that really highlights your presentation and communication skills. Maybe you try a version that more so highlights your research background. Just try out a couple different things and just be open to feedback and criticism. I think throughout the whole application process, you should continue to try to network with MSLs. And then again, if you develop a good relationship with an MSL and they offer to look at your resume, definitely take them up on it and be open to any feedback that they might have.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, that's really great. I guess, Shane, just to segue into what you said, to me, I was not receiving any response at all from my applications. And, I talked to so many people. Renee was one of the persons who helped me quite a lot. But so many people were helping me with my resume. And it seems like at some point, I did something that I cannot exactly say what it is on the resume. I started getting a lot of answers. Now, I always think about what they're doing on the other side. Are they using AI to filter your resume? What kind of tools the company is doing to hundreds of resumes that are coming on their desk, or the person that is managing. So what I started doing is I would match every word of my resume with the job post. And I think if there's any AI doing like the first sweeping of the job to, I don't know, get the top 10 resumes, mine would be maybe in the pile because of the wording. And I think this is, it can be a hard job, but kind of you have to, a little bit like in academia, you got to tailor your resume to every single job application. I think that increases your chance. And this is my experience. And I had all these interviews, but I ended up choosing academia for the time. But I think that was when I felt, okay, I think I crossed the line at least now to get interviews. I don't know if anybody had similar experience, but but in the beginning, no response. Like Lindsay said, just keep trying. But you need to ask for help for sure.
Dr. Tonelli, I have a question, I guess. So that is some great advice, and I have been hearing that almost every career panel I go to do that. And I feel like everyone is aware, everyone who's applying to these jobs is now aware of that. So I'm thinking everyone who's smart enough, which hopefully everyone is doing that. So at
Yeah.
the end of the day, every job is getting all of these resumes that are perfectly matched. And now what is the AI screening going to do? Like out of the top 10, if every resume is still matching, like how does it still select? Because I feel like that's not so much of a secret anymore. A
Yeah.
lot of people are doing that, but that is like a great thing to do still. So
Yeah, I think
yeah,
um, you have to do a little bit of digging. And one of the
okay.
things that I do is number one, if you try to find, I got an interview because I know that there was maybe thousands of application, but I reach out to the recruiter. I
Mm,
just sent her a very sweet message on LinkedIn and I said, hey, so exciting this job. Looking forward to talk to you. Now, could that be the very thing that she said, okay, let me look who is this guy? And then she
okay.
looked at my resume and I was one of the persons that, that she wanted to interview. Or you can leave it like by chance, right?
Okay.
I would rather do as much as you can to reach out,
Okay.
be an email, LinkedIn, like Lindsay said, like LinkedIn is a great tool.
Hmm.
They can see your face, you see their face, and put the name together. Um, Even kind of inform a message. Hey, I saw the job post. I'm really excited. I hope we can chat, something like that.
I have a follow-up question. So do you guys have any advice or any tools to share that can help you up your LinkedIn game? Because I am barely on LinkedIn. I mean, I do have an account, but when I look at my profile, I cringe. I don't know how to update it as best. So do you guys have any tools or, any advice to how to upgrade your LinkedIn game?
That's a great question. I don't believe that we've done a webinar on LinkedIn specifically, but that's a great
Yeah,
idea for your future
that's
webinar.
Yeah.
Um, I would also recommend checking out, if you guys don't know already, there's somebody named Tom Caravella. He is a recruiter. I'll put this in the chat. And he has a podcast that I really recommend. So the podcast is called MSL Talk. It's by Tom Caravella.
yeah, it is great.
And he's, I think, the founder of the MSL recruiting company in medical affairs called the Carolyn Group. So I would, and he does a podcast very regularly for years. So there's so many episodes that you can check out. I believe they're all on YouTube in addition to like Spotify and Apple Podcasts.
Yeah.
I highly recommend checking those out. And he very well could have a LinkedIn podcast episode already that you could listen to. Um, in general, though, I would say you pretty much want your LinkedIn to mirror your resume. Anything that you have on your resume, you want to find some way to upload that to your LinkedIn. You definitely want to have a picture on your LinkedIn. You want to have your name, obviously, any certifications you might have. So really just start by transferring your resume really into your LinkedIn. And then just look at other LinkedIn profiles. Look up some MSLs, look at what their profile looks like. Of course, there's going
Hmm.
to be some people who don't really use LinkedIn, but it could be a good way to get your started. And then, like your resume, it's going to take time to get it how you want it. And I would recommend just being open to change. Every once in a while, look at your LinkedIn, make sure it's saying what you want it to say. Portraying you the way you want to be seen. Um, but I highly recommend being on LinkedIn so you can reach out to recruiters you might see. I mean, I see recruiters all the time posting job postings. Um, you can reach out to other MSLs. So I think it's a really important tool to use. But yeah, like anything, it takes time and practice to get comfortable with it. But that's a great idea for a future webinar, and we can do a LinkedIn walkthrough.
Thank you. I'll definitely check out the podcast. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you, everybody. We're really happy you guys were able to join us. We plan to post this on YouTube later. Do we have any last minute question before we close it up, Lindsay?
I do just want to remind you guys to join our LinkedIn group, Ask and Tell with Medical Science Liaison. So if you have trouble finding it, feel free to shoot me a message or Luan a message, and we can add you to that group. And then also, we will be putting this on YouTube. So yeah, check out our YouTube channel as well, Ask and Tell with MSLs on YouTube. And we have a couple old videos from old webinars as well to check out.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much. Well, stay posted. We plan to do this regularly, at least once a month, right, Lindsay?
Yep.
And we'll look forward to our next speaker. Maybe Renee will be one of them sometime this year, right, Renee? And yeah, thank you, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.